Well, hey there. It's your old pal Keith from Wavetables.lol. That's Wavetables.lol, home of KRC Math Waves Drink Time. My enormous collection of wavetables, single cycle waveforms, and even some samples for all sorts of modern synthesizers, including our new friend, Korg Multi-Poly Native here. Korg Multi-Poly Native is out today. The version I am playing right now is version 1.0.1. And so this brings the amazing sound of the Korg Multi-Poly virtual analog, or we might call it virtual modeling synthesizer, to your native hardware. So it runs standalone or in a VST in your, or as a VST in your DAW. Say it right, Keith. We'll get to what's going on here in a minute. As you know, I'm a huge fan of this synthesizer, so let me just tell you that the micro review of Korg Multi-Poly Native is it sounds exactly like the hardware, which is to be expected. It might even sound better than the hardware, depending upon the type of audio interface you have. And it's a wonderful synthesizer. Its impression of the way that analog voices move against each other and its emulation of different kinds of amp envelope responses and tuning variations and drive into the amplifier, and its filter models are all excellent. And so I would just say go to Korg and go try the free trial of Korg Multi-Poly Native, because it's a wonderful sounding synthesizer. Now in the trial, you won't be able to save your patches or import stuff into it, but you can play with the presets, you can do some programming that's going to get lost, you know, when you close the program, but it's super interesting, and it's just a lovely sounding synth. So, as I said, this thing sounds, the native version sounds just like the hardware. I've been beta testing it for many weeks now. And, you know, any differences between this and the hardware have effectively been eliminated at this point. And it's just a really fun synthesizer. Now, note that I have a 3-part series on Korg Multi-Poly that kind of takes you through the architecture of the synthesizer. It runs through a bunch of different patches. I cover all the different oscillator types. There are 3 different oscillator types. You've got virtual analog oscillators that model the classic waveforms and some unusual ones, and have some cool features like detune saws so that you have 2 sawtooth waves in a single oscillator. It also has a wave shaping oscillator that I did a whole video on in part 3 of my look at Korg Multi-Poly. And then it has a Wavetable oscillator, which we're hearing here for the most part. You see that there's a detune saw up here, and then I've got 3 oscillators that are playing different wavetables, and you can see there's a little bit of motion in them. These sounds, by the way, are wavetables that I extracted from old Rompler vocal samples using a script that was used to create my KRC Orchestral Impressions wavetable collection. So maybe you missed my last video where I introduced this very inexpensive set of 38,000 wavetables that will grow over time as I improve my timbral extraction techniques. But it's a collection of like orchestral instrument samples that have been converted into wavetables using some novel techniques. And I'm not here to talk about that today. I want to give like some more quick examples of Multi-Poly Native since it just debuted today. And so we're going to hear some of the same patches I played in my hardware series. There'll be links in the description to all the stuff. There'll be links to Math Waves. There'll be links to KRC Orchestral Impressions. There'll be links to Multi-Poly Native from Korg, and maybe other things I mentioned today. You might have noticed that I'm in a different recording environment today. I'm actually at, of all places, I'm at Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville Resort in Kissimmee, Florida. I'm here on a work trip for one of my clients. It's a little rainy out today, so I thought I'd finish up this video. Let's go through. So, I'm a point here. A point of order, Keith. What were you going to talk about? What I'm going to talk about is the fact that I'm on this little tiny laptop. I have this little Asus ExpertBook laptop. It doesn't have any like fancy audio interface in it, and then my usual keyboard controller is absent. I have my little tiny travel one. It's this little, I don't know if you can see it. It's this little Legato. It has wireless, but it's a velocity sensitive, but really only in spirit, little 25 note keyboard. And so I'm having quite a bit of lag because I don't have a professional audio interface here and the way I have to run this on OBS. So I'm not going to do my usual shitty playing today. I'm just kind of playing some block chords that are done with the chord mode on the Legato. And so, blah, blah, blah. If it seems like I'm laggy or I'm more like fat fingered than usual, it's actually just my setup. It has nothing to do with the lovely Korg multi-poly itself. Let's maybe run through some other patches. So, the patch we just heard just now, this choral patch, again, is a sound that maybe we haven't heard yet from multi-poly native, because multi-poly native, unlike the other Korg R&D synths, by which we mean the Korg Wavestate and the Korg ModWave, does not play samples, but you can use these kind of extracted, sample emulation wavetables to get kind of a sample-like flavor. So that's kind of fun. Here is a patch that uses the wave shaper oscillator. Whoops, whoa, let's take that out of chord mode. This uses the Korg multi-poly's chord mode, which is built into the synth. So there's a chord mode here. You can specify the different notes that you want to play for every single note that you press on the keyboard. And this can be really nice for doing pad-like sounds. It can, kind of give you textures that you wouldn't otherwise maybe come up with by your own crappy playing. If you're a crappy player like me, you're probably a way better player than I am. But one nice thing about the native versions of these Korg research and development synths is that, unlike in the editor librarian, which is a piece of software that connects to your hardware multi-poly or one of those other synths, the native version actually shows you a waveform display. So, as we tweak the parameters of this oscillator, these are both wave shaper oscillators, we will see their shapes change, right? And so we can actually see a little bit more like what's going on with our waveforms. We can also see the effects of different modulations on them, which is really cool. How did I change the sound? It changed subtly by messing with those parameters. I'm not going to do a lot of programming teaching today. That's in my really in my first 3 videos about multi-poly. But you heard this patch in my exploration of the wave shaper oscillator, and it sounds exactly the same as its version in the hardware. Let's do some other quick examples. I feel like Korg multi-poly is just, it's the best emulation of what happens in an analog synthesizer. And it's filter emulations. In this patch, we are using the lovely SEM filter. So this is a filter. This is a filter that emulates that Oberheim style synthesizer expander module filter. It comes close to the kinds of filters that are used in the Oberheim OBX instruments. And it has a beautiful sound to it, a really cool resonance. We're also using the crossfade parameter here to give this little fizz on top. You hear as I play these notes. Let's go back into chord mode maybe, on my keyboard controller. Whoops. You can hear that nice fizzy texture on top. because the shape of the filter is changing here to be a little more toward a high pass, and so it's letting some of those higher frequencies in. Another thing that's lovely in this patch is I'm using drive. There's drive here that's being modulated with velocity, and so and it's also being modified. Whoops, where is it? It's being modified by filter key track. So the drive becomes higher. It becomes like a little grittier as we play down the keyboard. And so if we play low notes, we get this beautiful growl, extremely convincing analog amplifier impersonation there. And the reason that I called this patch, which you've seen before, that I called this patch Andromeda Shaper, is a lot of the sounds that you can get out of Korg Multipoly, while they can sound like almost any virtual analog synth, they actually remind me a lot of the old Alesis Andromeda, which I was lucky enough to have one of some years ago. So this is using a combination of the detuned saw oscillator and a wave shaping oscillator. Let's move along. A lot of people commented on this patch from my first Korg Multipoly video, where I was demonstrating the wave shaper, and also the fact that in the filter section we have audio rate modulation on the filter. And so this patch, which responds to velocity, my keyboard does not respond well to velocity, but as I play softly, you can hear this slow LFO that's modulating the shape of the wave shaping oscillator. Let's take that out of chord. And as I play with higher velocity, that LFO speeds up and gives us this kind of mysterious sound. This sounds sort of like a fantasy flute instrument. And you hear that noise that's coming through. I'm not using noise enveloped and then like mixed into this sound. What's happening is noise is actually modulating the filter cutoff at audio rate. And it's a distinctly different sound from just sending noise to the mixer. The mixer, by the way, in the Multipoly native software is over here. You might have noticed that there's sort of a pseudo-modal thing going on. There's so many oscillators to show, and there's two filters, of course, in Korg Multipoly that we can have in parallel or in serial. And then, combined with the common pitch section and then the mixer on any layer, there's not a lot of room for more stuff. So if you click down in here, you can expose the noise section, the ring mod section, the sync feature, right, which does oscillator sync, the cross modulation feature, and then your portamento settings. Again, just like in the hardware, there's a bunch of new portamento types that respond with different rates, that emulate all sorts of vintage analog gear. You've got the drift and voice variation section here, which is exactly like in the hardware. By the way, the CMT ID, which kind of governs the way that the drift is configured for each virtual voice in the synthesizer, it's the same as in the hardware, but you access it a different way. Like if we wanted to change our CMT ID here, we'd go to Settings, and then somewhere in here, where is CMT ID? Here it is, CMT ID. I'm currently set to 116. Every time I open this Multipoly software, my CMT ID will be 116. It's also persistent when you use VST instances, but let's say like you were using two different tracks, maybe of Multipoly, and you wanted them to have different CMT IDs so that even if you played the exact same patch with the exact same notes, they'd be slightly different. You can modify the CMT IDs here in Settings. All the same settings. Amp and drive section is here. You can see I've got my drive up a little bit on this, and we're using one of the voltage controlled amplifier models. We're using the MS-20 model here. All of the different VCA type models respond differently, kind of have different curves, have a different sound to them, a different way that a voice that's being picked up again might respond to velocity, or how it might respond to the level of the audio that's already there in that voice. It's all very convincing. I've showed it before. Because I'm like in this silly hotel room, I don't want this to be like a really long video. You know, if I were to move drive way up, you can hear how dirty this gets. And of course, I could have attach this to a mod knob or something, or a MIDI controller on my keyboard controller to control drive. Or I could modulate it with an LFO or a, you know, an envelope of some sort, whatever. That's a cool patch. And again, this if you compare this to my first Korg multi-poly video, you'll find that this patch sounds exactly the same. Let's move on. Let's see here. I spent a lot of time in my first video talking about sounds like this. I do these I like to do these patches where we have PWM and we combine it with this trick of creating the PWM sound from two sawtooth oscillators that are modulated in a very specific way. I'm not going to explain how to do that again today because I think that's in about 3 different videos, but this is a patch that I had played Sweet Dreams on. And it's this keyboard that the response from this keyboard is so slow I can't really play. Yeah, okay. That's about all I can get out of that right now. But you get the idea. Very beautiful analog emulations. With great sounding PWM, no matter how you make it happen. Let's move on to something else. I had showed, and this is similar to the Andromeda Shaper patch, but here's a patch that uses the, again, that crossfade that's on the SEMP filter to put a little bit of fizz into this patch. This is a little different because I didn't have the same wavetables installed as in my original version of this. So you hear that after the filter decays, we get a little bit of this burbly fizz on the top of this patch. Whoops. When those voices dropped out there, it's like if I hit this keyboard with very low velocity, it doesn't fire all the notes. It's stupid. But see how much I love you, that like I'm doing this video even with my crummy setup. Oh, you know, the other thing is most of my videos are in 4K. Right? And so, but this one's just going to be in 1080p because that's all my screen does on my little tiny laptop. The other thing you might notice is that, like, we're getting all the notes out of it. Like most of these patches, actually none of these are probably configured to use a small number of voices. It's actually just using the dynamic voice allocation. And I'm not hearing notes being stolen, even though I'm running on, well, it's not a potato. It's certainly not like a high-powered studio machine. So like one of the great things about having the multi-poly native software is that I don't have to have my hardware multi-poly with me. You know, to do programming, right? I can patch all day. I can experiment with the, new wavetables that I've created and stuff like that, right? So let's see, what is this patch? Gosh, it's hard to play this keyboard. So this is kind of a little bouncy patch. It's using a different filter here. So this is using the monopoly emulation. One of the nice things is that you can see charts of all of the different filter types here, right? We've got a lot of different filters. There's a monopoly inspired filter, a mini Moog style ladder type filter, a Prophet, that's the Pro low pass filter. There's the MS-20 low pass and MS-20 high pass, which we know from WaveState and from ModWave, but all these filters have been rewritten, and they do sound different and better to my ears than the filters, say, in ModWave, which are no slouch. We've got the SEMP, which is a multi-mode filter that sweeps through a low pass smoothly up to a high pass, also has a separate bandpass mode. We've got a ladder style, again, Moog style high pass, a ladder bandpass, and then we've got generic like linear filters, a two-pole low pass, which is a very useful filter to have around, a four-pole low pass, two-pole high pass, four-pole high pass, some band passes, band reject, a four-pole band reject, and then the multi-filter, which I'm not going to show today, but it's a very interesting filter. It morphs between different filter types. So this is another patch that I showed in my first monopoly video where I talked about the stereo mix and filters. So in a Korg multi-poly layer inside of a performance, there are 4 layers, by the way. Each layer has 4 oscillators. So you can get, in fact, way more than 16 oscillators under a single note in a single Korg multi-poly performance. It's pretty wild. Let's move on to some other sounds real quick. I had shown this technique for adding juice to a filter to, you know, say take the mini Moog style filter, give it a little more juice, so maybe it sounds a little more Roland-y, maybe a little more Jupiter-y. And so what I'm doing here in this patch, which I explained in my first video, I think this is from the first one. Oh no, this is from the second one where I covered the wavetables. So what I'm doing is, just like in ModWave, the wavetable oscillator, which is called the digital oscillator in multipoly, has all these different modifiers you can do. So you can make a wavetable so it only has odd harmonics, even harmonics, a bunch of different harmonic stuff. You can tilt the harmonic spectrum up or down around, I think it's either the 12th or the 20th harmonic. Anyway, by tilting a wavetable up and then just mixing it in slightly, you see here's its volume into the mixer, we can give the impression that this filter is maybe a little bit brighter than it would otherwise sound. And so we can get a little bit of that squirty kind of Jupiter-y sound. As I've mentioned in other videos in this series about multipoly, just in multipoly native, you could emulate all sorts of different synths. It has a lot of range, and then of course you can do instrumental sounds that don't have any exact analog in analog vintage synthesizers. We used the word analog in 2 different senses there. Nice going, Keith. If you watch my weirdo musical videos, you might have heard this sound at the beginning or end of some of them. Kind of sounds like electricity. This is using a whole bunch of different modulations and then the exceptionally interesting wave shaper oscillator to do this sample and hold wacky kind of sound effect sound. There's a lot you can explore here. Like another thing that you can do with multipoly, as I touched on in some of my other videos, is you can get into kind of modular synthesis territory. There's a lot of interesting stuff to do. And I'm not even touching the modulation sequencer in that patch. I'm just using LFOs and stuff to do that. You know, one thing that I really like doing with almost any type of synthesizer, but I love the sound actually of digital oscillators into an analog filter. And the analog filter emulation sounds so good here that I get the same impression using Korg multipoly or multipoly native as I would with using a synthesizer that has pure digital oscillators that are being run into analog filters. So this is, you know, the type of sound that's Let's see. Let's change our chord here. I'm a little tired of that was like F major. Let's do like a F. Wait a minute. F minor 7. So this is a sound that's kind of digital underneath because it's using wavetable oscillators. And you see that this wavetable oscillator up here has a lot of high frequency content in it, combining that with a more tame digital oscillator. And then we're using the detuned saw virtual analog oscillator here, combined with the two-pole low-pass filter and just the normal drift and voice variation modes to create a sound that's like reminiscent of things like an Ensoniq ESQ synthesizer, which of course had digital oscillators and analog filters. We could choose one of these other filter emulations, like, you know, the SEM just sounds so good, right? We could use that one. We weren't using any cutoff there. Let's do this. Turn up the resonance maybe. It's just really fun to play with, well, especially if you have like KRC math waves. You can, you know, you get my like zero crossing wavetables that I showed in another video. Let's grab like a 0 cross 1. And let's see, we could just change this. Let's see, let's spin through another. Oops, let's spin through another oscillator here. We've got increment controls here, so we can, oh shoot. I'm not filtering. Let's see here. I want one of my, let's do one of my bright sort collection. Let's see, let's do like a bright sort 8. Bright sort 8. Come on. Let's see, here we go. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's got a lot of high frequency content. Now, one interesting thing, actually, that I don't think I've mentioned in my previous multi-poly videos is that all of the different oscillator types respond to the voice drift thing. So we're actually getting some randomization and drifting in the digital oscillators here, even though that's not a thing that would really happen in a digital oscillator. So we could do things like turn the drift all the way down, but we could leave the voice variation up, you know, on, well, maybe we'd turn pitch off, but we could leave it on the filter and the oscillator settings and the envelope and the LFOs, right, and the portamento rate. And so this would be like a better emulation of a you know, like a pure digital oscillator being run into analog electronics. If we wanted to get a little more old school flavor, we could turn on a mod like Vintage 8 or Vintage 12. I've talked about these in ModWave and talked about them in my other multi-poly videos, but the Vintage 8 mode like allows aliasing in the wavetable and conforms the whole thing to be 8 bits, and this gives you very much of a PPG type of sound. Let's see, we will hear, there we go. You can hear that kind of fun, beautiful 8-bit aliasing sound. on certain keys, especially in the lower registers. Let's see here. We'll move on. I had experimented again in another one of my multi-poly videos with moving the drift and voice variation parameters like up as far as they'll go. And it's actually a really interesting effect. It doesn't create the sound of a broken synth. It just creates the sound of a synth that's, you know, pretty seriously miscalibrated, but it can still be really beautiful. And so here's a pad sound. Where the CMT, or sorry, I guess it's the CMT variation, you could call it that, but it's the drift and the voice variation is all the way up as far as it will go. And it creates this wonderfully kind of swimmy sound as we play chords with it. Real pretty. Let's see. I was playing around with some other Wavetable type patches. Again, you know, it sounds exactly like the hardware. It's fantastic. You can get all sorts of really great sounds out of it. One thing I did want to show, we looked at this, like, well, there's a choral patch that I played in the intro, but I've been playing around with importing my KRC Orchestral Impressions wavetables to multi-poly native. That collection is provided as MP bundles. And so actually, while I was sitting in this hotel room here, I downloaded the string collection and I think the idiophone collection from KRC Orchestral Impressions, drink time. And I was fiddling around kind of combining two different layers into a multi-poly patch. So the first layer has like these wavetables that were extracted from violin ensembles. So we've actually got two different articulations here. There's a spiccato articulation in Os1, and then an arco vibe, vibrato type of articulation in oscillator 2. And so combining that with on layer B, just a detuned saw. There's a whole bunch of different modulations and stuff going on in this patch. Spit it out, Keith. But it sounds like this. So you can hear there's that pseudo-realistic string sound, and then if you listen to the filter sweep that comes in underneath it, it's a very synthy sound. Go really low. That can be a really beautiful effect. So those are the kind of things you could do with orchestral impressions and multi-poly. Anyway, Korg multi-poly native, it's out right now. This video is going to get released the moment that Korg announces it. Hooray, look at me with a day one video, huh? Huh? Wow. Or maybe even a 0-day video. Exciting. Also, I'm on vacation and working in very difficult circumstances. You know, I have a plastic cup for my drink instead of, you know, a nice glass one like I do in my little studio at home. Anyway, go check it out. There's links in the description. I love this synthesizer. It's great to be able to take it on the road with me, like even if I'm at Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. looking for my lost shaker of salt. Hey, it's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol saying, go get Korg Multipoly Native and try it out. It's awesome. And ta-ta for now.